there comes a quiet moment in life, not loud, not dramatic, when something within you begins to shift. It is not when the world changes, it is when you do. There is a moment in life when you begin to see yourself clearly, not through the eyes of others, not through expectations, not through comparison, but as you truly are. This awareness of your own worth does not arrive loudly. It does not announce itself with noise or force. It comes quietly, like a realization that has been waiting patiently within you all along. For a long time, you may have measured yourself based on how others treated you. If they valued you, you felt worthy. If they ignored you, you felt small. Without realizing it, your sense of self became dependent on something unstable, other people's opinions and moods and attention. And because of this, you may have accepted less than you deserved, thinking that was all you were worth. But awareness changes everything. When you begin to recognize your own value, you start to question the patterns you once accepted without thinking. You begin to notice how often you stayed silent when you wanted to speak, how often you said yes when your heart was saying no, how often you gave your energy to people who did not respect it. This awareness is not meant to create guilt. It is meant to open your eyes. You start to understand that your worth was never meant to be negotiated. It was never something others could give or take away. It has always been there, constant and unchanging, beneath all the doubt and fear. And yet, because you did not see it clearly before, you allowed yourself to be treated in ways that did not honor who you are. Not because you are weak, but because you were unaware. Awareness is the beginning of strength. As you become more aware, you begin to feel a subtle shift within yourself. You no longer feel comfortable in situations that once felt normal. Conversations that drain you become more noticeable. Disrespect that you once ignored now feels heavier. It is not that the world has changed. It is that you are seeing it with new eyes. This can feel uncomfortable at first. Growth often is. Because when you become aware of your worth, you can no longer pretend that certain things are acceptable. You can no longer convince yourself that it is okay to be overlooked, to be undervalued, to be taken for granted. Something within you resists it now. And that resistance is a sign of awakening. You begin to realize that you deserve to be treated with respect. Not because you have proven yourself, not because you have earned it through struggle, but simply because you exist. This understanding is quiet, but it is powerful. It removes the need to constantly prove your value to others. You stop chasing approval. You stop seeking validation in places where it was never meant to be found. Instead, you turn inward. And in that turning, you begin to rebuild your relationship with yourself. You start to listen more carefully to your thoughts. You notice the way you speak to yourself in moments of failure or doubt. You begin to replace harsh judgment with understanding. You become more patient with your own growth, more accepting of your imperfections. This is where true self-respect begins, not in how you demand others to treat you, but in how you treat yourself when no one is watching. Because if you do not see your own worth, no amount of external validation will ever feel enough. Awareness teaches you to stand differently. Not with arrogance, not with superiority, but with quiet confidence. You no longer feel the need to shrink yourself, to fit into spaces that do not appreciate you. You no longer feel the need to change who you are just to be accepted. You begin to understand that the right people, the right opportunities, the right experiences, they will align with you when you are true to yourself, not when you are trying to be someone else. This awareness also brings responsibility. Because once you see your worth, you cannot unsee it. And once you know what you deserve, you are faced with a choice to honor it or to ignore it. There will still be moments of doubt. There will still be situations where old habits try to pull you back. But now, there is a part of you that knows better. A part of you that reminds you that you are not meant to settle for less. And each time you choose to honor that awareness, no matter how small the action may seem, you strengthen your sense of self. It is not about becoming perfect. It is not about having everything figured out. It is about remembering, again and again, who you are and what you are worthy of. This awareness becomes your foundation. It shapes the way you think, the way you act, the way you move through the world. It influences the choices you make the people you allow into your life, and the standards you set for yourself. And slowly, without force, without struggle, your life begins to reflect this inner shift. Because the moment you truly see your own worth, you stop living as if you are less. There is a quiet strength that begins to form within you when you start setting boundaries. It is not loud, it is not aggressive, and it does not seek attention. It is calm, steady, and deeply rooted in self-understanding. For a long time, you may have believed that saying yes made you kind, that tolerating everything made you strong, that sacrificing your own needs made you worthy of love and acceptance. You may have thought that keeping the peace meant ignoring your own discomfort, that avoiding conflict was the same as maintaining harmony. And so you allowed things to pass that did not feel right. You stayed in conversations that drained you, in situations that disrespected you, and around people who did not value your presence. At first, it may not have seemed like a problem. You told yourself it was easier this way. You told yourself that your feelings were not that important, that it was better to adjust than to create tension. But slowly, something within you began to feel heavy, not because of what others were doing, but because of what you were allowing. When you begin to respect yourself, this pattern becomes impossible to ignore. You start to notice the moments when you feel uncomfortable, but stay silent. You recognize the times when you agree to things you do not truly want. You become aware of how often you put others before yourself, not out of genuine care, but out of fear, fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of being misunderstood. And in this awareness, a question begins to rise within you. At what cost? Because every time you ignore your own boundaries, you are sending a message to yourself that your needs do not matter. Every time you allow disrespect to pass without acknowledgement, you are teaching others how to treat you. Not through words, but through what you tolerate. This is where change begins. Setting boundaries is not about controlling others. It is not about forcing people to behave in a certain way. It is about deciding what you will and will not accept in your own life. It is about taking responsibility for your space, your energy, and your peace. At first, this can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. You may hesitate before saying no. You may feel guilt when you choose yourself. You may worry about how others will react. This is natural because for so long, you have been conditioned to prioritize everything and everyone else above your own well-being. But boundaries are not acts of selfishness. They are acts of self-respect. When you say no to something that does not align with you, you are not rejecting others. You are honoring yourself. When you step away from situations that drain you, you are not being difficult. You are being aware. When you choose not to engage in disrespect, you are not being cold. You are being clear. Clarity is what gives boundaries their power. You begin to understand that you do not need to explain yourself endlessly. You do not need to justify every decision you make. Not everyone will agree with you, and not everyone will understand you. But understanding from others is not a requirement for yourself. Respect, there is a quiet confidence in simply knowing where you stand. And as you begin to express your boundaries, you will notice something important. People will respond. Some will respect your limits. They will adjust. They will listen. And they will value the clarity you bring. These are the people who recognize your worth, not because you demanded it, but because you showed it through your actions. Others may resist. They may question your change. They may try to make you feel guilty. They may say that you have become distant, that you have changed, that you are no longer the same person. And in a way, they are right, because the version of you who accepted everything without question is no longer leading your life. This is where your strength is tested. It is easy to maintain boundaries when others accept them. It is much harder when they challenge them. But this is where true self-respect reveals itself, not in comfort, but in consistency. You begin to understand that not everyone is meant to stay in your life in the same way. Some relationships were built on your lack of boundaries. And when you change, those relationships may shift or even fade. This can feel painful, but it is also necessary, because anything that requires you to abandon yourself in order to maintain, it is not meant to last. Boundaries create space. Space for healthier relationships, for deeper connections, for mutual respect. They allow you to engage with others from a place of authenticity rather than obligation. You are no longer giving out of fear or pressure, but from a place of genuine choice. And this changes everything. You begin to feel lighter. Not because life has become easier, but because you are no longer carrying what was never yours to carry. You are no longer responsible for everyone's emotions, everyone's expectations, everyone's approval. You return that responsibility to where it belongs. And in doing so, you reclaim your energy. You start to invest your time and attention more carefully. You become more intentional with who you allow into your space. You begin to value quality over quantity, depth over surface, honesty over convenience. This is not isolation. This is alignment. Because boundaries are not about shutting people out. They are about letting the right people in, those who respect you, who honor your limits, who see your value without you having to prove it. Over time, setting boundaries becomes less about effort and more about identity. It becomes natural to speak your truth. It becomes normal to protect your peace. It becomes part of who you are, not something you struggle to maintain. You no longer feel the need to overextend yourself to be liked. You no longer feel the need to accept less just to avoid being alone. You become comfortable with your own presence, with your own standards, with your own choices. And in that comfort, there is strength, a strength that does not need to be loud, a strength that does not need to fight, a strength that simply stands firm and grounded, knowing its value. Because when you set clear boundaries, you are not just changing how others treat you. You are changing how you see yourself. There is a subtle dependency that forms when you begin to rely on the approval of others to feel worthy. It does not happen all at once. It builds slowly through small moments when someone praises you and you feel uplifted, when someone ignores you and you feel diminished, when someone validates you and suddenly you feel seen. Without realizing it, your sense of self begins to shift outward. You start to look at others to decide how you should feel about yourself. Their words become your mirror. Their reactions become your measure. And in this process, you lose something important. Not your value, but your connection to it. Because when your worth depends on validation, it is never stable. Some days, you feel confident and strong because others are kind, attentive, and approving. Other days, you feel uncertain and restless because that same attention is no longer there. And so, you begin to chase it. You adjust your behavior, your words, even your identity, just to maintain that sense of being accepted. At first, it feels necessary. You tell yourself that it is normal to want appreciation, to want recognition, to want to feel valued, and it is. But there is a difference between appreciating connection and depending on it for your sense of self. When that line is crossed, you begin to abandon your own center. You say things you do not fully mean just to be liked. You agree with opinions that do not resonate with you, just to avoid rejection. You present a version of yourself that feels acceptable, rather than one that feels true. And over time, this becomes exhausting. Because no matter how much validation you receive, it is never enough. It gives you a temporary sense of relief, a brief feeling of being seen, but it does not last. You find yourself needing more, again and again, like trying to fill something that cannot be filled from the outside. This is where awareness begins to shift things. You start to notice how often you look outward for confirmation. You begin to see the patterns, how your mood changes based on others, how your confidence rises and falls depending on their responses, how your sense of worth feels uncertain when validation is absent. And in this awareness, a deeper understanding begins to emerge. You realize that as long as your value depends on others, you are not truly free, because you are constantly adjusting, constantly seeking, constantly waiting for someone else to tell you that you are enough. And this realization can feel uncomfortable, because letting go of validation does not mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop needing them to define you. This is a quiet but powerful shift. You begin to turn inward, not in isolation, but in reflection. You start to ask yourself questions you may have avoided before. What do you truly think? What do you truly feel? What matters to you, even if no one else agrees? At first, the answers may not come easily, because for so long, your focus has been outward. You have been listening to everyone else's voice, but not your own. And so you begin slowly. You give yourself space to think without influence. You allow yourself to feel without judgment. You begin to observe your own inner world, not as something to fix, but as something to understand. And in this process, something begins to rebuild. You start to recognize your own perspective as valuable. You begin to trust your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own intuition. Not because they are always perfect, but because they are yours. This is where independence begins, not from people, but from the need for their approval. You no longer feel the same urgency to be validated. You do not feel the need to explain yourself to everyone. You become more comfortable with being misunderstood because you are no longer trying to fit into every expectation placed upon you. This does not mean you become distant or disconnected. It means your connection becomes more honest. You speak more truthfully without shaping your words to please. You express yourself more openly without fear of constant judgment. You allow others to see you as you are, rather than as you think they want you to be. And something interesting happens. The right people begin to resonate with you more deeply. Because when you are not seeking validation, you are no longer performing. You are no longer filtering yourself to gain approval. You are simply being, and that authenticity creates a different kind of connection, one that is not based on need, but on mutual understanding. At the same time, some people may drift away, not because you have done anything wrong, but because your energy has changed. You are no longer feeding the dynamic that once existed. You are no longer seeking their approval in the same way, and that shift can feel unfamiliar to them. This is part of the process, because letting go of validation also means letting go of the roles you once played. The people pleaser, the one who always agrees, the one who seeks acceptance at any cost. You begin to stand on your own, not in isolation, but in self-alignment. You understand that appreciation from others is a gift, not a necessity. It is something you can receive without depending on it. You can enjoy recognition without needing it to define you. You can listen to feedback without losing your sense of self. This balance creates stability. Your confidence is no longer fragile. It does not break easily when someone disagrees with you. It does not disappear when someone fails to notice you. It remains steady because it is built from within. You begin to feel a quiet sense of peace. A peace that comes from no longer chasing, no longer proving, no longer seeking constant reassurance. You become more present, more grounded, more connected to yourself. And in that stillness, you find something deeper than validation. You find self-acceptance. You begin to see yourself clearly, without exaggeration and without harsh judgment. You acknowledge your strengths without needing applause. You recognize your flaws without feeling defined by them. You become whole, not because others have completed you, but because you have stopped looking outside for what has always been within. This is the moment where everything begins to shift. Not because the world has changed, but because your relationship with it has. You are no longer chasing approval. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You have already chosen yourself. There is a silent battle that exists within every person, the pull between what is easy and what is right, between what is comfortable and what leads to growth. Most of the time, comfort feels safe. It asks nothing from you. It allows you to stay where you are, to repeat what is familiar, to avoid the discomfort of change. And for a while, this feels acceptable. You stay in routines that no longer inspire you. You hold on to habits that do not serve you. You remain in environments that feel limiting simply because they are known. There is no immediate pain in this, no urgency that forces you to move. But slowly, something within you begins to feel restless. Not because you are lacking something outside, but because you are not expanding within. When you begin to respect yourself, this restlessness becomes clearer. You start to realize that comfort is not always a place of peace. Sometimes it is a place of stagnation, a space where your potential remains untouched, where your abilities remain unchallenged, where your life begins to repeat instead of evolve. And in this awareness, a choice begins to form. You see that growth requires something from you. It asks you to step into uncertainty. It asks you to face your fears, to question your habits, to move beyond what feels easy. It does not promise immediate reward. It does not offer constant reassurance. But it offers something deeper, a sense of progress, a sense of becoming. At first, choosing growth feels uncomfortable. You may hesitate before taking action. You may doubt yourself when things become difficult. You may feel the urge to return to what is familiar, simply because it is easier to stay than to change. This is natural, because your mind is designed to seek safety, not expansion. But there is a difference between safety and limitation. When you respect yourself, you begin to recognize that staying the same is not always protecting you. Sometimes it is holding you back. You begin to see that avoiding discomfort today often leads to regret tomorrow. And this realization gives you strength. You start to take small steps, not dramatic changes, not sudden transformations, but quiet decisions that move you forward. You choose to do what is necessary, even when you do not feel like it. You begin to replace habits that weaken you with habits that build you. You start to invest your time in things that challenge you, rather than things that simply distract you. These choices are not always visible to others. They happen in the moments when no one is watching. When you decide to stay disciplined instead of giving in. When you choose to learn instead of remain ignorant. When you push yourself to continue even when it would be easier to stop. This is where growth takes root. It is not in grand gestures, but in consistent effort. It is not in perfection, but in persistence. You begin to understand that growth is not about becoming someone else, but about becoming more of who you are capable of being. And as you continue on this path, you begin to notice something changing within you. Challenges no longer feel like obstacles to avoid, but opportunities to evolve. Difficult moments no longer feel like signs to stop, but signals to deepen your strength. You become more resilient, not because life has become easier, but because you have become more capable of facing it. At the same time, your relationship with comfort begins to shift. You no longer see it as something to cling to, but something to balance. You understand that rest is necessary, but stagnation is not. You learn to step out of your comfort zone, not recklessly, but intentionally. You challenge yourself in ways that align with your growth, rather than forcing change without direction. This creates a sense of purpose. You are no longer drifting through life, reacting to circumstances as they come. You are actively shaping your path, making decisions that reflect your values, your goals, your vision for yourself. You begin to move with intention rather than hesitation. And this intention changes the way you see yourself. You begin to trust your ability to grow. You start to believe in your capacity to improve, to learn, to overcome. You no longer define yourself by your past limitations, but by your present actions. This builds confidence, not the kind that seeks attention, but the kind that is rooted in experience, because you know what it takes to move forward. You have faced discomfort and continued anyway. You have chosen discipline over distraction, effort over ease, growth over comfort. And through this, you begin to understand something deeply. Your life changes, not when things become easier, but when you become stronger. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You stop looking for motivation to appear. Instead, you act, even when it feels difficult, even when it feels uncertain, because you know that every step you take toward growth, no matter how small, is a step away from the life that keeps you limited. And in this continuous movement, you begin to transform, not into someone different, but into someone who is fully engaged with their own potential. Someone who does not settle for what is easy, but reaches for what is meaningful. Someone who understands that true comfort is not found in avoiding growth, but in embracing it. And so, when you look back at this journey, you begin to see that nothing outside of you was the true beginning of change. It was not people. It was not circumstances. It was not luck. It was a decision. A quiet, powerful decision to finally see yourself clearly, to honor your worth, to stop abandoning yourself in places where you no longer belong. The moment you became aware of your value, you could no longer accept being treated as less. The moment you set boundaries, you created space for respect to enter your life. The moment you let go of needing validation, you took back your power. And the moment you chose growth over comfort, you stepped into the life you were meant to live. This is how everything begins to change. Not all at once, not instantly, but deeply. You begin to walk differently, not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty. You begin to speak differently, not to impress, but to express truth. You begin to live differently, not to please others, but to stay aligned with yourself. And along the way, you may lose certain things, old habits, old connections, old versions of yourself. But what you gain is far greater. You gain clarity, you gain strength, you gain peace. Because you are no longer divided within yourself. You are no longer searching for who you are. You are standing in it. And from this place, life no longer feels like something you have to chase. It becomes something you create. Through your choices, your awareness, and your willingness to remain true to yourself. So remember this in moments of doubt, in moments of weakness, in moments when the old patterns try to return. Nothing changes until you do, and the moment you choose to respect yourself truly, deeply, without compromise, that is the moment your life begins to transform.